Ex-rich people of Reddit, when did you lose everything? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. I don't know if this fits, but my ex had a friend who inherited $1 million in cash and near-cash assets when his only parent died, and he was 20 years old. Now, you aren't just going to retire at 20 on $1 million, but it's a great way to pay for college, maybe buy a car and a down payment on a house, and invest the rest. Basically, it's a really good way to start your adult life and nearly ensure you'll be quite wealthy in your later years. Did he do any of that? Nope. Bought himself a ridiculous luxury car, bought cars for his friends, bought wardrobes of designer clothes, threw huge parties repeatedly, etc. Ended up broke in 2 or 3 years and went back to waiting tables to make rent. Sad to see. Answer: it's a bit hard to articulate, but my attitude about money really changed when I realized that $1 million is a lot to earn, but not enough to significantly change your lifestyle before the age of retirement. It's enough to buy a modest house and car outright and set yourself up in business or get an education. The rest can be invested and offer a nice buffer against times of unemployment, but you still need regular income. Story 2. The Somali Civil War. My grandfather had a manufacturing company, but the war ruined it. My family used our last $500,000 to get our relatives out of the country. Story 3. Friend of mine is a direct descendant of a super rich Spanish noble from Madrid. Essentially, this guy made so much money, nobody in the family needed to work for over a century. But because nobody worked, there was no money added to the family fortune, and it slowly dwindled away. His dad got the last of it and used it to get a degree from a good university and is doing really well for himself. Story 4. Growing up, my best friend's family was extremely well-to-do. I'm talking running with the bulls in Spain, private jets to Aspen to ski, kinda rich. My friend had every toy, gaming console, and cool piece of clothing imaginable. Right before our senior year of high school, my friend's dad eliminated himself. Turns out he was cooking the books at his business, as well as falsifying his taxes, and the company was basically worth nothing. He was looking at 30 years in prison, so he just decided to end it all. My best friend went from a 6,500 square foot mansion on the water to a 1,200 square foot condo with his mom and 2 siblings. He adjusted to being poor like the rest of us, and he is still my best friend. Story 5. My wife's aunt used to be rich, was married to a brain surgeon who was also on the board of directors for all the local hospitals, so pulling down 2 checks. She was a platinum member of a local casino and would send us and other family members coupons for all-inclusive weekend visits to the casino. You literally did not need to bring any money for anything. All food, drink, gratuity, ECT was all taken care of. Anyway, her husband had his medical license revoked for writing too many scripts for painkillers to her and other people, and they both now live in Mexico somewhere. Story 6. Maybe not exactly rich, but my sister would have been set for life. Her father died from cancer, and she lost both her eyes to cancer at the age of 6 months. The way things were set up, she was going to be able to draw her father's Social Security the rest of her life, so long as she never married and had a full ride to an all-blind college, dorm and everything, paid for through scholarships. She was a really smart, straight-A student, and she was going to be a court stenographer. So this pay combined with the Social Security may not have made her exactly rich, but she would have been extremely comfortable in life close to rich. A little white before she was supposed to leave for college, my parents found a note onto the front door. It was from her new husband. She had ran off and gotten eloped. He also discouraged her from going to college. The man was 20 years older than her, about a year or 2 older than my mother, who later admitted her wanted to marry my sister because she knew she'd be able to draw a disability check. So not only did she lose her scholarships, but she also lost her father's Social Security before she even received the first check from it. And that man got her involved in a lot of substances. He was a man from the local church that basically manipulated my sister and did that thing that most abusers do by making the person they're targeting feel incredibly special and desirable. My sister, being only 18, I think 16, 17 when they met, took the bait. They divorced and she's clean now, had been for a few good years, but now has to live off her disability check and food stamps. She talks a lot about how she wished she had just gone off to college, and it's sad to see how one bad choice changed everything. She really encourages her daughters to focus on education and was one of the driving forces that encouraged me to get my GED when I dropped out of high school. Answer: reminds me of a Humans of New York post. This little old lady shared a story where, in her youth, she and her best friend were about to embark on some kind of world trip. Their boyfriends met them at the docks. The friend's BF said, "I won't wait for you." so the friend turned back and didn't go. The interviewee's BF said, "I won't wait either." She replied, "Then don't." She got on the boat and went on to have an amazing life. Story 7. This story went in my family, way before I was born. My family used to be very wealthy. My great-grandfather, to be exact. My mother showed me a bunch of photos of wedding and the big houses. She describes my grandpa as a pure soul and would do favors to our family beyond money. One day, my great-grandmother got really sick, and my grandfather sold houses and spent a lot of money on making sure she got the attention she needed. My family is nowhere near rich now. We have our difficulties, but we take good care of each other. The important thing is that my grandmother lived longer than my grandfather. Story 8. During this year's outbreak, after I gave out my company's final cash flow to employees, we dissolved the thriving company, and I ended up the same. Story 9. I wouldn't say I was rich, but I had a job that paid $120,000 a year after working there for 3 years. My GF of 10 years, who I was about to propose to, left me out of the blue. I had bought a ring. I saved up enough money to help with the wedding, and even enough to put down on a decent condo for a starter home. Anyway, after she left me, I fell into substances and adult beverage and ended up losing my job. I ended up getting into an accident when driving tipsy. I hit a concrete barrier and only hurt myself, thank God. Don't drink and drive. I broke my back and shoulder blade in an ATV accident, again tipsy F, and am now held together by pins and needles. I can't do labor work anymore and now make minimum wage in the food industry. I lost 3 more jobs due to substances and adult beverage before I finally checked myself into rehab. Story 10. My parents had built up a multi-million-dollar company over a couple decades before and during my early childhood. Around 2006, they separated and ran each other dry in court. Then the crash came and bankrupted both of them and lost everything they put years into. Unknowingly, recently, after my mother's parents passed away, she was able to take a portion of an investment account that built millions from her father's stock from working in the railroad industry. My father rebuilt his business from scratch, repaired his credit, and has grown it bigger than it ever was before. By the age of 21, I've witnessed my life go from rich to broke to wealthy. I am in a great position in life now for my age. But work, plan, live, and learn, like everything could be again gone in the blink of an eye. Story 11. It wasn't me. It was an ex-girlfriend and her family. Her dad was a war artifact collector and salesman. The kind of job where one sale, $5,000, $100,000. That kind of quick money made him believe he could live rich. So he lived in a big house, had another big house in a different state, a timeshare on an island. He would swap out for the newest Cadillac Escalade every 2 years. He managed to run life like this, getting into a habit of really bad spending choices for 20 or so years until it was revealed to everyone he was subsidizing all of it with credit and wasn't making nearly as much money as he used to or claimed. That was when the IRS and the banks came knocking. He had held on to some artifacts and art and was able to sell those piece by piece to slow down and lessen the blow, but it was an undeniable downward spiral, and he ended up declaring bankruptcy. Private artifact collectors and art collections just aren't as hot as they used to be, so he'd have to settle on low prices for all the sales. Now he frequently moves around in a different state to keep the IRS and banks off his tail. And my ex is just about the only person who has stuck by him through this, but there is only so much she can do. Story 12. I have never been rich, but my family was well above average when I was a kid. My father was a mechanic, and in 1981, he bought a car repair shop that made us money pretty well. Then in 1992, the Bosnian War started, and our hometown of Sarajevo was put under a siege that lasted until 1996. In 1994, we were able to escape the city and move into a refugee camp. When the war ended, we returned to Sarajevo, and my father's car repair shop as well as our home were in total ruins after all the artillery and mortar fire. We were able to get a new home fairly quickly with the help of some of our relatives, but we never got the car repair shop fixed. It was in so bad condition we just demolished it after we had sold all found scrap metal and usable tools. Answer: I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm American but ethnically Slovenian Croat. They call them Bojans where I'm from. Found out my great-aunt went to Ljubljana in 1991 to help the transition. She was a politician, dual citizenship, and owned business in both America and Yugoslavia, print shops. Apparently there were hundreds of people like her from all over the world just in her social circle. Thousands or tens of thousands of peacekeepers who wanted to have a nice transition. She came back in 93 and said we didn't fail. There was never any hope to begin with. The West was fine. The East is not. The old story is that her older sister had left in 1898 because she knew things were going to go wrong. guess she was right. Story 13. I wasn't rich, but comfortably upper middle class. If I wanted to spend my birthday in Paris, I could, for example. However, I was in a toxic marriage and had been out of the workforce for years raising my children. Once they were older, I got help for my depression and got out of the toxic marriage. At the time, I worked for a local newspaper and was able to put a down payment on a modest house for myself and the kids. Then the housing market crashed. Then the print news market crashed. Then my ex-husband withheld child support. I had several very lean years while I built up my own business, and it was incredibly hard. But you know what? I don't regret it at all. I came through to the other side a stronger, much happier person. I have a great relationship with my now grown children and their children. My income isn't impressive, but I have what I need. I can stand on my own 2 feet and overcome adversity. Looking back, I wouldn't trade the experience of the last 15 years for anything. Answer: I wasn't rich, but comfortably upper middle class. Upper middle class is like 100K AR for a family. 150K AR for a family is not middle class anymore. I don't know if I'd call it rich either, but it's definitely not middle class. Being able to afford going to Paris for a birthday while simultaneously not working suggests to me you are well outside middle class, although I accept I could be wrong. Story 14. Not me, but my grandfather on my mother's side used to be an incredibly wealthy man in Mexico during the 50s. In his town, he had the most cattle and land and even owned a few saloons. My grandmother was one of the girls he'd used to attract men to spend money there. In his hubris, he surrounded himself with greedy yes men and women who took advantage of his alcoholism and would get him very tipsy and sign away his wealth. After he lost it all, he abandoned my grandmother and their children and drank himself to passing. We have no clue where he's buried, if he is at all. Story 15. Obligatory, not me, but both my grandparents from both sides were extremely wealthy. They lost all their wealth during partition. My paternal grandpa told me how they buried kgs of gold in Pakistan to get it back one day. His father was a landowner and moneylender, basically really wealthy, but they never returned post-partition. All wealth lost in a day. Many people have similar stories of burying gold and moving and never went to get it back. Story 16. My grandfather inherited a fishing company worth multiple millions of dollars. When the fishing stocks ran out, he lost the company, but walked away with what should have been enough to set my family for life: cash burn and poor investments. Lots of it went to good causes, like a down payment for a house my parents then worried constantly about losing. More went to failed businesses and a gold mine up north. They were dead broke by the time I was in middle school. I'm sure it's part of the reason me and my parents are so careful with money. Grandparents are fine, but rely entirely on my parents and the government. Story 17. We are pretty well off. We are frugal, but we have a family member who makes 14 of what we do, who lives a fancier life than us. Just remember, exterior signs of wealth, cars, house, etc., are usually bogus. Answer: this is all very true. I grew up in a family that was well off. Not necessarily rich, but we were definitely upper middle class. But we didn't spend money where we didn't have to. Most people on my block would get a new luxury car every couple of years from leases, and kids would get new sports cars or imported cars or Jeeps for their 16th birthday. Meanwhile, I bought my own 10-year-old Chevy Suburban with almost 100K miles on it, and I still own it and drive it to this day. My parents bought 2 new cars just this last year to replace their current ones because they were literally falling apart from their usage. Furthermore, we never bought any designer clothes or anything. Most people where I lived had to have the newest Gucci or tech device, but my mom used an iPhone 5 until she accidentally dropped it in the garage and ran over it with her car. Even then, she didn't get the newest iPhone and opted for an older model because they all do the same thing. If we weren't such a frugal family, I don't think we would be half as close to as wealthy as we are, but it's all about saving a few cents here and there, which compounds over time to a decent amount of dollars. Remember this: you don't need a new car or a new phone or fancy clothes for people to like you. If they only care about superficial possessions, then they're shallow. I myself have made a decent amount of money from working and financial investments, but only my sister knows how much money I actually have because I want people to like me for me, not because of how many commas are in my bank account. Story 18. I wasn't ever rich L, but was set to inherit a nice amount from my grandparents. Enough for college and a house. That was what my grandfather wanted for us all. Well, the problem was my grandmother got a bit demented in her old age and gave a lot of it away. She was really taken advantage of by people around her. A lot of it went to charity, but we estimate about $2 million went to her IDK, what to call him. groundskeeper, and his wife. They actually did very little other than squeeze tons of money out of her for years, including after she went to assisted living and were no longer working for her. After my mother took over the estate, we found out my grandmother had almost no money left. She went to some fancy assisted living, which she should have had plenty of money for about 6 months, and then had to go to some Medicare Roach motel, where she rapidly declined in health and died. Before the move, she was active and in fair health. Story 19. My great-grandfather owned I don't know how many acres of vineyards and then lost them all during Prohibition. Everyone in my family from its founding up to my grandmother went to Stanford, but my dad had to go to Berkeley like a peasant. Story 20. Not me alone, but my family. Both parents got serious illnesses, about $2 million gone in 5 years. I went from really never thinking much about money to everything being gone, wondering how to run up all of my parents' debts as far as possible to keep a roof over their head before having them declare bankruptcy. American healthcare is borderline criminal. Story 21. I am never going to be rich, but my parents were upper middle class. It started with Asia financial crisis in the late 90s, but at that time, my parents still could manage money well. It goes downhill after my dad to be exact. He decided to loan more money from the bank, but he did not have enough credit. So he used the house we are in as a guaranteed. The bank wouldn't give him a pass because they need my mom, co-owner of the house, to sign the contract. My dad came back from the bank and coerced my mom to do it. My mom did. They are both narcissists, abusive, and fought with each other a lot. My mom got tired from arguing, so she gave in. Then before he could pay off all of the debt, he got cancer and died. So my mom has to be a responsible one and has to pay for all of the rest of the money because she agreed to sign the contract. Then she refused to negotiate with the bank because to her, it is beneath her to beg, and she thinks she can find the way. But the interest rate just keep piling up. And so now we don't have any money left. The whole thing happened not so long after my sister quits her job, got married and moved to another country to become a housewife. So no one in a family can make a monthly income to pay the bills, except my sister, who later got another job, but she has her own family now. So it is not her responsibility to give all of her money to us. My mom is also a narc, and I think she has several mental illness, so she made several bad decisions after my dad died. So the situation is slowly getting worse every day. Story 22. Well, I was never rich, but my great-grandfather was the main accountant of a very big steel mill in the 1920s. My grandfather grew up going to school, passionately playing violin and just being the son of a well-off family. Then the crash happened, and for some reasons they lost everything, and suddenly my grandfather had to become a manual worker to support his family. No violin, no studying. He was a quiet man in his later years who had lost any ambitions, married a very strong-willed cook, and never disagreed with her. Story 23. Not me, but my family a long time ago. Back in the late 1920s, we started a garbage company. Consumerism was new, as was the trash it created. My great-great-grandma didn't fancy being married to the town garbage man, so we sold the business and started an ice business. We bought some expensive lakefront property and cut gigantic chunks out every winter. Then put the ice in insulated warehouses and sold it all summer. Then refrigeration came along. The trash business is still around. It's one of the largest in the Midwest. Story 24. We thought the family had money. My grandfather had a lot of land he's leased out for farming and raising cattle. When he passed, of course, my grandmother took over everything. She died a few years later, and we discovered she sold all of the property and burned right through that money. We weren't actually disappointed, but we hoped for a little something to be left to the rest of the family. Story 25. My family is still filthy rich, but I'm not anymore because I chose to save my life and run away when they wanted to take down me to preserve the family name and honor. I've slept on the streets and currently have €2 to my name, but at least I'm alive, right? Story 26. My grandma. She inherited most of the money from her husband when he passed. A bit over $2 million, with about $150K divided between the 5 children. My father, her son, does everything for her as she is 93 and has severe Alzheimer's. The plan was to split the money equally between the 5 children when it was her time. About 2 years ago, she started asking my father for money to pay for groceries and random things. He got curious and checked the bank account with the inheritance in it, and it was all gone. She had gotten the approval from the bank without my father's consent, which was supposed to happen, and donated everything to the Catholic Church. Not saying that is a bad use of the money, but could have been used to improve the lives of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Story 27. My uncle used to be in good place. He bought his own little house to live with his kids and wife. He could afford brand new, as in 2008 standards, laptop that could cost around $3K, But then he started to steal stuff, mostly scraps of metal from neighbors and larger companies. He got arrested and almost sentenced for prison, but psychologists said he was unstable during that time. Now he lives in my Nana's cottage. Can't afford to pay bills for electricity, have no shower nor toilet. He's constantly causing car accidents, and he's living off of gov money for his children. Story 28. I was born working class, worked hard, had some luck, and made money. I then lost it trading on the stock market. Made more money, lost it, and have repeated the cycle every few years. Yesterday, I did a deal that made a lot of money, but I constantly do high-risk transactions that either made a lot or blow up spectacularly. Story 29. I guess I was never actually rich, but when I moved out from my parents and had to start providing for myself. Story 30. Lost the family business in a lawsuit. I wasn't rich. I was in my mid-30s, and the older generation, dad, uncle, kept a tight hold on the wealth. But when it went down, it took everyone down with it. 11 years of legal battles with 2 trips to the state Supreme Court. I eventually went back and got my MBA and went into an entirely new field. I'm doing okay, I guess. Some lean times as a middle-class debt slave, but it's finally getting better. The moment I lost everything was when we had won the appeal, but the state SC sent it back to the appellate court and basically said, no, try again the attorney fees. And strain was too much, and my brother, the company president at the time, laid me off. And don't get me wrong, people all over the world go through much, much worse. I kept my house, fell back on what savings I had, and we got through, but finishing grad school at age 40 in a tough job market with fresh student loan debt was scary. Story 31. My great-grandfather used to own land in the south of the UK. It was around 2,000 acres. When he died, he left the land to his 2 sons, but they had a huge falling out over what to do with the land. My grandfather wanted to keep it, and the other wanted red, and to sell it ASAP. The argument between the 2 brothers got so bitter that they didn't speak for years, but in the end, my grandfather ended up backing down and agreeing to sell the land to make amends with his brother. They sold all the land except for 2 one-acre plots to build their homes on. They got a good amount for it, but not nearly enough to make them rich. This all happened in the early 1960s. Recently, 5 acres of the land they used to own sold for just under $1 million. The developers named one of the streets in the development after my grandfather's family name. More of a case of hindsight being a wonderful thing than lost wealth, but I do wonder what could have been. Story 32. Not me, but an ex-GF. She's East German, and before the war, her family were very, very wealthy. Something to do with radio transistors or other pieces that went into radios. Then once the Russians solidified their hold on Germany, they lost everything. When I knew her, it was the early 2000s, and her dad had just about given up using the courts to try and get back any of their holdings. The manufacturing plants had been seized by the Russians and then sold to others, and my ex-GF's family just couldn't afford to fight it legally. They were able to reclaim 2 or 3 private residences. One was a really big manor house, but after 50 years of Soviet ownership, they were either derelict or just shells, and the family didn't have the money to renovate or rebuild. I think they were sold for land value alone. Story 33. Friend of the family used to take lavish vacations twice a year. I'm talking about essentially traveling to the world's premier destinations before retirement. I'm not sure what job she had, but she was loaded. Turns right before she was able to retire, she was let go. She had blown her retirement savings and was left with nothing. Essentially, her income became Social Security checks. Last I heard, she either had gotten cancer or did actually die. Story 34. My grandfather was a massive farmer, wheat distributor in the Balkans. Socialism hit while he was building one of the biggest wheat milling factories in Eastern Europe. The government came and took around 1 million euros in 1974. That was supposed to be invested in the mill. Then tried to rebuild by only being a distributor, since he had the connection, and had a full boat of sugar and wheat stolen from him, worth around 500,000 euros. Interpol got involved, but it was never found. At the point, he was over getting robbed and too old to continue. The factory still stands in my parents' hometown, half finished. Story 35. My great-grandfather was by far the richest man in my town. He grew up really poor, but inherited a massive amount of money from the guy he worked for his whole life. He bought houses for poor widows and loaned it to other people who needed it. But when the widow died, the remaining family hoarded the money. Others never paid him back when they could. He didn't seem bothered by it, though. He had enough to live comfortably and just did it because it was the right thing to do for a Christian man. Story 36. My great-grandfather was gifted a large 40-acre piece of land at the time worth about $26 million, and it has been in my family for over 100 years. This is in Puerto Rico, and my family was offered by owners of the Hilton properties almost $400 million for part of the land to build a hotel there, but they refused. Right now, property is basically worthless, since my uncles who live there now let the land in disrepair, and about 80 to 90 is covered by trees, plants, and is filled with exotic birds that make their home there, one of which is a protected parrot species. Basically, we would have been millionaires, but they were stupid enough to refuse a deal. The Hilton Hotel was built a few miles down. Story 37. My great-great-grandfather was very, very wealthy. The wealth was mostly inherited and came from a long line of business interests in shipping from the golden age of the British Empire. The Great Depression took away a lot of that wealth, then Yabadadu finished off what was left. My great-grandfather, who I was lucky enough to know, went from being born in a grand mansion to a two-bedroom terraced house during the course of his early life. He did not speak fondly of his father. When my great-grandfather died, the family decided to sell his very modest flat. While clearing the house, there were several large pieces of furniture. They got appraised that ended up being very old and very valuable antiques, so not all the wealth was lost in the end. Story 38, Oratorinchoin. One of my oldest friends had this happen in her family to her grandparents. Forgive the hazy facts. We discussed over several bottles of wine and am ridiculously uneducated about Chinese history. Her grandparents were very high up in Chinese social classes, had been socially prominent for a few generations. They aligned with a particular political faction that rode high until they fell from power and people were chased out and/or takedown. One of her great-grandmothers died from starvation. Her grandparents were able to flee to Taiwan, where they started over and raised their family. They went from the top tier of the social class to very poor. My friend was born in Taiwan when her parents were about 20 years old. They immigrated to the U.S. where she was raised. They were solidly middle class when my friend and I met in kindergarten. We're both in our 40s now, and her family is upper class again in China, Taiwan, and America. They regenerated the wealth but have stayed far, far away from politics regimes. Story 39. My grandmother's family apparently lost much of their wealth when a German U-boat sank the boat carrying pretty much all of their possessions. They weren't exactly rich before that, but they sure as heck weren't after. Story 40. One family member basically burned through the trust, in some ways illegally, and in others just dumb. Like instead of taking a loan from the trust and paying it back, thus perpetuating the fund, to pay for her very expensive house, like over $500,000 when a well-appointed house in our area could easily be purchased for $150,000, the $175K. She just took money directly from the trust, purchased the house, then didn't pay taxes until it went to a tax auction. Stuff like that added up fast until the money was gone. Story 41. I was never rich, but my great-grandfather was a multimillionaire with well-known stores all across the southern USA. His wife OD'd, and his kids got tied up in substances and gambling. I never saw a dime and grew up poor, though not necessarily in poverty. I usually had at least ramen to eat, but basically didn't know what home-cooked meals or veggies tasted like, and only went to a private school, briefly because I got a scholarship for academic reasons because I busted my jerk. I usually had to decline events my private school friends invited me to because I couldn't afford them, and eventually got left out all the time and became sort of a perpetual loner. Oh well, least it builds character, maybe? My great-grandfather's name is still on the front of the high school because he donated so much money to the school and basically funded half of it. And it pissed me off every day for 4 years looking at it and being reminded that I wouldn't have to bust my jerk from, no exaggeration, sun up to sundown if my grandpa and his siblings weren't such POSs. I'm sure he'd be pissed AF to see what became of the money he worked so hard for. Story 42. I wasn't rich in a monetary way, but with family. Although, yes, we're well off and now poor, but I'm happy this way. Home is toxic, so we'd always go out. Go to friends, uncle, and grandma. Just being around these guys, it was something else. Grandma died 2018, uncle 2 months ago, and haven't seen my friends since Corona hasn't calmed yet. Every day it's a screaming battle between everyone, and it gets worse every day. Money can do shoot. We were rich. Poor after 2008, I crashed then, rich again. No matter how much money I have, they're not coming back, and I can't meet my friends. It's fudge. Story 43. On Sunday, not really rich, but we didn't struggle. We live super rural, and work is very difficult to come by. I'm a part-time voice artist, but I don't make much. It's a competitive. My husband was the big earner. Long story short, my husband tried committing tragic end Friday. Turns out he lost his job 3 weeks ago due to fault of his own. He told me nothing, dressed up daily and sat in the basement of the local strip mall while I thought he was at work. Somehow we ran into debt totaling, if converted, to around 50K USD. It's an insane amount of money. He has a life policy that would pay out if his attempt was successful. It obviously wasn't because I came home earlier than he expected, thinking it was strange he was so insistent on me extending my visit to my folks. He's in a clinic now for a few days. So yeah, we went from 3 meals a day to me telling my 11-year-old he can have the 2 sausages I made because I never really liked meat that much to begin with. Story 44. Accountant was embezzling my funds from a very successful video store business and my wife's acting career. Lost everything except a backward little town I had purchased for my son. It's been tough, but I'm keeping my family and myself upbeat as we transition to the new life. Story 45. Not me, but my aunts and uncles. When my grandfather died, he left behind a sizable amount of money and assets. The bulk of it went into a trust with my dad, aunts, and uncles designated as beneficiaries and my grandmother as trustee. My dad and his siblings also received a cash payout in addition to getting an annual amount from the trust. I won't go into figures, but we're not talking about a small pot of money here. Everybody who got something should have been able to live the rest of their lives in comfort, if not in luxury. But somehow my aunts and uncles managed to burn through their initial payout within a few years, and, in spite of their yearly check, began pestering my grandmother nonstop to increase their payments. My grandmother stood her ground and refused, so her kids, minus my dad, had to live within their not inconsiderable means. My grandmother died nearly 2 months ago. We found out not too long after that she appointed my dad to manage her estate in the trust. She left nothing to her other kids, my aunts and uncles, and stopped the yearly payouts. However, my dad's not the sort to abandon his brothers and sisters, so I'm pretty sure the trust will still support them. So while my aunts and uncles aren't exactly penniless, they're also not going to be chartering private planes to fly around or spending God knows how much on luxury garbage. Story 46. There's one story I heard on the news years back. This woman won the lottery, millions of dollars, or maybe lucky for life. Can't remember anyway. When they showed up to her house with the big check, and shoot, she was so surprised, excited she couldn't stop shaking. She then asked her son to sign for it for her, which he did. He was then awarded all the money as it was his signature on the documents. Instead of giving it to his mother, he stole the whole thing. Didn't give her a dime. They tried legal action to get it back, but they said since he signed, everything legally belonged to him. Special place in hell for that jerk. Story 47. Not so much a story of me being rich, but my family. I see others posting similar stories, so here's mine. My family moved to New Zealand from Ireland in the mid-1800s, settling on a small island near Auckland called Waiheke Island. As I understand it, at one point the family owned almost the entire thing, probably worth billions of dollars at least in today's money. They had some kind of business there. As I understand it, they contributed construction supplies during the early days of Auckland's establishment. Several generations passed, each with a vast amount of children, and at some point, Waiheke Island was sold to the state, and the money went, well, somewhere. This was a long time ago, and the money was nothing compared to what it would be worth now. There was like 14 kids in my grandfather's generation, and it might have even been the generation before his that handled the sale. I'm not entirely sure. As for where the money went, who knows? Certainly not to my branch of the family, who has largely been middle class to poor as long as I've known. The only evidence my family was ever there is a small peninsula that bears our last name. And because of marriage and whatnot, I'm the last of my fork of the family that still bears the name. Story 48. The day my dad decided it was a good idea to steal from his company, where he was the head of the economic board. Story 49. A PI lawyer in my group of friends was doing incredibly well. Huge house in a Beverly Hills. Wife had all the latest bags and jewelry and cars. Always got huge cases with significant injuries and large settlements. All of a sudden found out he was investigated by the bar, license suspended, and was being further investigated for insurance fraud. Clients transferred out and the faucet turned off overnight. Story 50. Family story. My family used to own several apartment buildings in the German equivalent to malls. They were also Jewish. On the Reichspogromnacht, 1938, the night where the Nazis staged a popular uprising against the Jews, most rioters and looters weren't in fact angry Germans, but SS and SA in normal civilian clothing. They were having dinner with friends as were therefore not at home when the Nazis raided and burned their house. They paid a taxi driver to drive my grandfather through Berlin for the rest of the night while the looting and takedown and the first deportations were happening, and went back to the friend's place they were having dinner at. The next day, all property was seized by the Nazis, the bank accounts taken, the house robbed and partially burned. They took the last bit they had, bought jewelry, fled to the Netherlands, and went to America. Story 51. When I saved the city, fell in love, I got married, saved the city some more. Maybe too much. My marriage got testy, made some dicey money choices. Don't invest in a spider-themed restaurant. Then like 15 years passed, blah, 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 super boring. I broke my back. A drone flew into my face. I buried Aunt May. My wife and I split up, but I handled it like a champion. Story 52. Mom said my maternal grandfather used to run a lucrative airplane parts supply company. When times were good, he used to give away cars as gifts. Then his business partner absconded with the money, and the business fell apart soon after. Grandpa still had some aircraft parts stock in storage, but my uncle had a substances problem and ended up stealing and selling it. Money was tight after that, but Mom and her 6 sisters made it through college and did pretty well for themselves. Story 53. My family weren't rich, but we were well off. When I was a teenager, my father was extremely naive and went into business with his friends. He did this not fully understanding the field. Company didn't do well, but he gave the family the impression that it was and was taking out loan after loan to keep the business afloat. He did this behind our backs, but by the time the truth came out, the debt was too much. We had to sell the family home and a lot of our assets just pay off the debts. Parents ended up divorcing after that. Neither parent ever fully recovered after that ordeal. Story 54. Well, I've never been rich, but I did once waste 200. Playing online roulette when I was 15. I grew up in poverty, so 200 has always been a lot of money for me, yet my stupid jerk still gambled it away. I've only played roulette for money in a casino since, and I never spent more than 20 on it per evening. Story 55. Not answering the exact question, but I believe it's close enough and interesting. My grandmother could have been rich by divorcing her husband. They did divorce because her husband wanted to be a woman. There were other reasons, but this was the main one. Her lawyer said she could get a lot of money, but they would publicize it because it was the first time 2 people divorced for this certain reason in my country. She said she didn't want to put herself and her kids through that humiliation and turn down the money. She now lives paycheck to paycheck with the help of government funding and all that fun stuff I don't quite understand. Story 56. My family owned a huge lot by the beach in Acapulco, Mexico. It got invaded, then cartels got a hold of it, worth at least 10 million USD. Impossible to get back, by law considered lost now. It was owned by my grandma. Story 57. My grandfather had several thousand acres of land, a newspaper, a dairy products factory, a lot of cattle, a big tractor factory, a large construction company. They lost it all 4 years before my birth due to a government loan gone bad, Latin American military government, and poor investment management practices, one business borrowing from another. After that, my grandpa died. My dad or brothers couldn't manage the companies, and eventually my grandpa's brother and lawyers took it all. My dad, who grew up filthy rich, now only had a modest house and soon a kid on the way. Shortly after he lost the house, they were able to send me to a free university and teach me English. I was lucky for having aptitude for computers and did good in computer science and EM, now doing very well. My dad lives modestly, but still has rich kid attitudes and can act up extremely spoiled. But we love each other and hang out several times a week. Story 58. Family was wealthy, or more precisely, my grandfather was wealthy. Somewhere in the mid-7-figure range. My grandfather started his own company and was making bank. He had 3 daughters and finally a son, my dad. My dad was a slacker through and through. My grandfather knew this, but had advised all his kids to marry wealthy. My 3 aunts married wealthy and all still live in that mid-7-figure lifestyle. My dad married my mom, a farmer, and had me and my siblings. We immigrated to Canada and still made bank. Definitely loved comfortably up until my grandfather passed. Then my parents got divorced and my dad had custody of us. He left the country and took my 2 siblings with him, dumped them in a boarding school, and left me with relatives in Canada. At this point, my mom had already gone off and was doing her own thing. Many relationships, and my dad had dried up all the inheritance with his lavish spending. I'm talking straight out of a movie. He had girlfriends that he gifted vehicles, luxury clothes, etc. too. Meanwhile, I started working at 16, so I could afford lunch because my relatives didn't care about me. My dad has still told me to this day that I should engage with wealthy people and marry into wealth. Story 59. God darn, this post exploded. Thank all of you. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if someone made a video off of this. Story 60. I was either 9 or 10, but my family and I were very well off. Just bought a brand new, custom-ish home in the suburbs, 2 new cars, summer vacations to Disneyland every year. We were doing great. My dad lost his job, though, and even though we had enough saved to pay for bills for 9 more months, we had to sell everything. We sold one of the cars, most of our belongings, and put everything that was of sentimental value in a storage unit. Sold our house and moved across town to live with my grandparents. It didn't really dawn on me then that we were homeless. My dad didn't have a job for a while, but he got one, and 2 years later, we moved. As of today, this is the first time I've lived in a house with my own room since then. We aren't nearly as well off as before. There's another looming threat of homelessness in our family, and this time, we can't live with any family members. Story 61. My great-grandmother descended from a very rich Spanish house during the 14th century, and they've been so rich that had not only house, but an entire village in Italy. However, she decided to transfer in this southern Italy's village and married my great-grandfather, another wealthy businessman. This happened during 20s. What happened then? Mussolini and fascism rising. My GGF immediately loved that, black sheep of my ancestor. And when war started, he decided to give everything to him. Money, gold, copper, agricultural land, etc., etc. Luckily, my GGM saved something, not so much at the end, and they've survived after the war over, even if with only house, much destroyed by the war, and nothing more. They never recovered from that loss. The Spanish and South American side of her family didn't speak with her due to husband and, till this day, don't know also where they are. Story 62. The whole rich people is a mindset is real. There are very few former rich people that are poor now. Rich people don't just exchange time for money. Story 63. My dad has never been rich, but he lost a lot of potential money because the company that he used to work for took away his downline organization. He was doing some shady things to keep it, though, so I guess he kind of deserved it. Never do anything associated with a company that not everyone is allowed to know about. Story 64. An ex-colleague of mine used to be a millionaire. He had a small busyness and did lots of fraud. Then he got caught. Story 65. My great-great-great and more great-grandparents were lords or something back in Korea. Then Japan came along and said, all your monies are belong to us. Thanks, Japan. I'm poor now. Story 66. My friend lost his million when he got a heart attack, which required many surgeries. So it was the hospitals that cleaned him out. He had no kids or wife to do the job either, just the hospital. I bet they perform unnecessary procedures on PPL with money just to violation their bank accounts. Story 67. Not me, but my grandpa. Over the course of his life, he built a civil engineering company, slowly nurturing and growing it until it was worth millions. Unfortunately, the bank demanded their mortgage be paid in full immediately during the mortgage crisis, which meant he had to sell everything, even though he had made all payments previously and was running a successful growing company. Unfortunately, not many people want to buy expensive equipment during a recession, so they had to sell for a fraction of what it was worth. Apparently, it was quite a stressful business to be in, so maybe it was a blessing in disguise. I might not have my grandpa anymore if he had still run it for the rest of his life, but my grandparents are happy now and without any bitterness or regret, living life to the full. Story 68. The first time, when I single-handedly tried to fund a theater company that was dying because it was in the middle of nowhere. The second time when I had to turn everything upside down because dangerous people wanted me dead. Story 69. Not me, but someone I know. Not rich, but upper middle class, I think. From what I know, her father had a nice job that paid the bills and her mother was able to stay home. I can tell she was the typical shallow daddy who pays for everything kind of girl. Her father died and her then boyfriend cheated. She started overeating and got fat and lost her figure. I've tried to help her get back up, but it's a hard endeavor. Looks as a matter of fact aren't everything. Story 70. According to my family history, we used to own factories in Germany back in the early 90s. Then when the Great War happened, WW1, my family, for reasons unclear to me, decided to leave everything behind, servants, property, everything, and came to the United States with only a couple pairs of clothing in a suitcase each. Story 71. When I lost the relationship with my dad after his strokes, he's partially paralyzed and can't talk properly. Story 72. I'm not rich, never was, but I have a story. I found out my wife was having an affair, and it broke me so bad. I was going to commit tragic end, but my family came over and wanted me to get help, so I did. I checked into a hospital where it's basically like jail. You can't have anything that could be used to eliminate yourself, not shoelaces, belts, anything. I saw two guys in there who owned their own successful businesses, had a family, etc. They both lost everything they had and currently are homeless. One was meth and the other was heroin. I hope they have gotten their act together, but I highly suspect they are still homeless and still using substances. Story 73. A couple of years ago, when my business that I loved so much started failing because of my partner's mental health issues, one day she really screwed me over, and I was able to see how truly large her issues really were. It wasn't a surprise, and it was at the same time. I learned that no matter how well things are going, or how badly, you need to know who you are and believe in a higher power no matter what. I was at a level of rock bottom way worse than what I imagined possible, and I shouldn't have let myself sink as low. I was still the same person, and things are much better now. I don't care if one would believe me or not, but pure magic from God helped me in many ways to get to where I am. I experienced many unmistakable miracles. If I would have known when that happened that I would be where I am now, I would have been shouting from the rooftops with joy. Story 74. So apparently my family used to be a quite rich and rather important family somewhere around Dusseldorf back in the early 20th century. Not quite as much as the Krupps, but still important enough that Ribbentrop would come over for dinner and such. My great-grandfather and his brother got eliminated, either by looters or British or French soldiers in 1945, and my granddad and his brother inherited the company. Somewhere around in the 70s, there was a big fight between them, and in the end, the company got sold and everything split up. In fact, there is an entire branch of my family that I have never met, even though we refused to talk. Now, even then, my grandfather was still fairly rich, but he had 4 kids, so you can imagine how that goes. TL.jar. My family went from rich to just well off in about 30 years. My dad grew up living in 3 mansions at the same time I did. Story 75. I paid my fair share of taxes and it destroyed my business. Literally not one ex-rich person ever. Story 76. In 2010, my business was doing pretty well. So I figured, this recession will be over any minute now. I'm going to capitalize on some cheap opportunities and aggressively expand. Moved to a larger shop, which was okay. But then in 2011, a competitor died suddenly, and I sunk everything I had into opening that as a 3rd location. The week we opened was the first time Congress shut down the U.S. economy to try to blackmail their way. Revenues at the original shop plunged to 30 of YoY baseline for well over a month, while the new store was crickets. That's when I fell into debt and haven't clawed all the way out to this day. Held on for over 3 years against the advice of my accountant, finally closed it on the verge of losing everything, still paying down some IRS debts from that era. Now I'm working solo like I started and actually taking home the same money without having to wrangle 3 knucklehead employees. My house should have paid off this year, but at some point I was 5 months in arrears and had to take a rescue loan that reset it to 40 years. Story 77. My dad, before I was born, was apparently well off from a mixture of things. He had painted power line towers, and at the time it was very good money, had a super nice boss friend that took him to Greece and paid for like a 5-star hotel and stuff for boss's daughter's wedding for a few weeks and a bunch of other stuff. My dad wasn't rich, but he wouldn't need to worry about money. He helped out his family when he could and then got a union carpentry job, so that was helpful. Well, I'm not sure if it was before or after my 10 years older sister was born, but my mom got breast cancer a few times and my dad exhausted all his savings to pay for medical bills and get my mom better. And my story was born pre-me by a few months in the late 80s, and she was in the hospital for the first months of her life, which cut even deeper. Then sometime shortly before or after I was born, 4 to 5 months prim, my mom's cancer came back. My dad quit his union job to take care of us and start his small remodeling business. And really, for most of what I can remember of my life, it's been a financial struggle. I always knew more about that stuff when I was supposed to. When my dad finally remarried my stepmom a few years ago, things slowly started to get better, but from all the medical bills and stuff, he still had a lot of debt. So basically, the failure of American medicine and debt. Story 78. I read 6 or so of these, and only one was the person who went broke. That's what I came here to say is, do you really think people want to admit what they did and how wrong it was? No, they won't. So you'll get a bunch of hearsay. Story 79. This is the story of a wealthy family who lost everything, and the one son, it's Arrested Development, my life story. Story 80. Born into rich family, continued living with them as an adult, but tried not to be financially dependent besides rent, cell phone service, and health insurance because they were abusive. Soon to be moving away at age 21 with a negative net worth, student loans. I am not poor, but not rich either. Story 81. Several instances. My dad didn't pay off the storage unit company, so they lit all our family stuff on fire. Later on in life, my belongings were damaged in a basement flood in a new house. So all the things that gave me status in my community and among my peers, gone. Completely gone. Now I live off of hand-me-downs or birthday presents, sometimes even Christmas gifts. I try to earn enough money to rebuy my own stuff, but I never make enough money that after paying bills, I can spend on any of those things. So basically, I will be broke for life unless I can snag a higher paying job. It's infuriating. I really enjoyed my rich life because back then I had more friends too. Maybe they were fake, but at least I had people to talk to, not shunned by society. People are cruel, dude. Story 82. Once I lived the life of a millionaire. Spent all my money, didn't have any cares. Took all my friends out for a mighty good time. Bought bootleg liquor, champagne, and wine. Then I began to fall so low, lost all my good friends, had nowhere to go. If I get my hands on $1 again, I'll hang on to it till that old eagle grins, 'cause nobody knows you when you're down and out. Story 83. About 5 decades ago, Government of India brought the Land Ceiling Act directed at landlords and restricted the land holding to 50 acres per family and confiscated the rest and distributed it to the landless. Both my father's side and mother's side lost few hundreds of acres in one go. That was it. Story 84. I had a cousin who made a lot of money in stocks or something like that. He lost it all someone and got super into substances. I only knew him from living in my cousin's shed. Story 85. My grandfather, he was a trust fund baby, and the trust was worth more than what a normal person could go through in several lifetimes. But my grandfather isn't a normal person. He was big in aviation and squandered the entire fortune on trying to make a commercially available flying car while simultaneously not understanding how a business is run or how these projects actually get engineered. Hundreds of millions of dollars and around 30 or so destroyed supercars later, and he has nothing to show for it. He's currently with a lady around his age who he gives $10,000 a month to live with in a house he bought for her in Florida. I've met her, and she might as well be a really expensive elderly adult worker. Not trying to be a male body part, just stating a very unfortunate fact. She clearly doesn't enjoy my grandfather and is just doing it for the money. My parents are currently worth more than he is as solid middle-class people. It's honestly astounding how much he fudge up. Story 86. My great-great-grandfather was the mayor of Prague twice, as well as a successful lawyer, and my great-grandmother owned several hotels where wealthy people would holiday on the Mediterranean. Then Czechoslovakia turned communist and the government told her they would seize everything, and she could leave, or they would seize everything, and she could stay. She left and came to Australia. My grandparents and mother too. Apparently, there are letters from various war reparations departments in Europe suggesting that we may or may not have returned monies awaiting collection. However, since my grandmother and great-grandmother have passed on, the chain of providence is getting thinner. Not to mention the costs of getting translators and lawyers involved just to find out if there even is anything of value in there. Could be several €100,000, could be several euros. But since we can't even travel to Czech Republic at the moment, there is no way to know. Story 87. When my dad left my mom for someone 20 years younger, my dad was hoping my mom would let her move in with us. Story 88. My great-grandfather was a landowner when gold was found out west. He failed to pay taxes and his land was mined IDK exact value, but there was enough gold to last 4 lifetimes. Story 89. I hoarded BBQ sauce instead of toilet paper and hand sanitizer for the pandemic. Huge strategic error. Also, if anyone needs some cheap BBQ sauce, then DM me. Story 90. I'm fortunate enough to live in a country which has not been so turbulent for hundreds of years. I hope you are doing okay now. Story 91. I know this is not on topic, but my grandpa had a lot of property, money, and cars. He told us that he would split it between my uncle and my dad, but died and my grandma took it all and gave it to my no-good, greedy jerk uncle who runs a fake pharmacy in India. The money was equivalent to $2 million. Story 92. My mother's family has been wealthy for hundreds of years. The parts of the family who no longer have money didn't stay the course. They bought a bunch of junk and didn't make sure the next generation had the correct vision and values. They valued leisure and luxury instead of service and personal fulfillment. Being rich takes a lot of discipline if you want to stay that way.